Okay. Come on. Let's present this. All right. I don't know where the chat went. I guess I'm not going to be able to see the chat while this is going. If someone could unmute themselves and let me know that you can see my screen.
You're good.
Okay, cool. Is my stuff blocking anything, or can you see it all?
Nope.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim.
I'm good. I can see everything.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So this is Queer Your Classroom. My name is Jamie Kubiak. I am the chemistry teacher at Park East High School, which is in East Harlem in New York City. So I wanted to just quickly introduce myself. This is my 6th year of teaching, which is crazy because I feel like I just started. But I've learned a lot about making my classroom queer inclusive that I wanted to share with all of you. Oh, come on. Oh, there we go. All right, so there is a little QR code here. If you are not savvy with QR codes, there's a little link, http://etc.ch/WXVQ. We're gonna do a little, let me keep that QR code up there. We're gonna do just a little like, where are we at right now? But while people are getting into that, you'll see that it's really just like a blank screen. I'll like pop over to it. This is what you should be seeing if you followed that link. Let me go back to my slides so that you can see the QR code. So if you're not so tech savvy, that's okay. You can just go ahead and watch the results. I just have a couple questions to see like where we're at and to kind of go from there. So let me give just like another 30 seconds for people to get into there. If you're having some trouble with that, feel free to pop into the chat. Okay. So the link is going to appear on the screen. So if you still don't, like if you're worried about me going away from it, it'll be there. Let me go ahead and start this. So I just want to see where people that are currently here, where you teach. So I've got a couple options: New York City, New York State, Western United States, Southern, Northern, Eastern, Central, or outside the United States.
Jamie, I can't get in at all on that link.
On etc.ch/WXVQ.
Yeah, they say it's they don't, it doesn't come up.
Huh.
Well,
Well,
I'll try again.
okay.
The capitals matter.
The capitals matter. Thank you, Pooja.
I don't know if that helps, but that was my problem too.
Thank you. Yeah, the capitals apparently matter. Put the link in the chat. Good idea. You all are so smart. And that was not sarcastic. A couple questions to warm you up before we get to some serious questions. Looks like a vast majority of us are from teaching in New York City. New York City represent. I would have put all the states like I did in the survey that you filled out, but I thought that that would be a little excessive. And we had some people from outside the United States, which is really, really awesome. Okay, cool. Let's go to the next question. It's okay if you missed that question. You'll be able to do the next one. What level do you teach? Elementary, middle, high school, college, other? All right, most of us seem to be high school teachers. Got a couple elementary folk. Good chunk of middle. And surprisingly, a lot of people who teach higher ed, which is awesome. By the way, this is a website called Direct Poll. I like it better than, forget what the other one is. There's another one that people use a lot.
Poll Everywhere, I think.
Poll Everywhere, yep, that's exactly what I was thinking of. I like this better because I think it's unlimited questions. Cool. All right, let's go to the next one. What subject do you teach? If you teach more than one, there's combination of subjects or other. Just choose the one that best applies to you. Lots of science people in there. Awesome, mostly science people. What's computer science considered? I guess you could put math or science. Whatever makes the most sense to you. If you teach 2 different levels, this isn't like a quiz, I'm not grading you. I'm just trying to get a sense of like who the people are that are here. Mostly science folk, couple math. Middle school drama represent, love it. There's a large array of people that filled out the RSVP link, so I was really happy to see that it wasn't just math and science people. Okay, let's go to the next question. Do you identify as LGBTQIA+? All right, looks like the vast majority are not, so you all are allies. Thank you so much for joining. It really means a lot as someone who is queer. And lots of my queer buddies in here. Thanks for coming. Next question. I know what every letter of in LGBTQIA+ means. So coming up are going to be a couple of statements, so you'll just kind of say where you're at. I know them all, I know most of them, I know some of them, I know 1 or 2, or I know none of them. No judgment at all if you don't know any of them. Feel free to be honest. That's why you maybe came to this PD. Awesome, most people know them all. Some people know most of them, some a little bit, know some of them. In case you're wondering, why don't we put it in the chat, make it a little interactive. What does L mean? Go ahead and put it in the chat. What does L mean? Lesbian. Nice job. What does G mean? Gay. Gay, 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 gay. This is the only acceptable gay comment in a chat room. Just kidding. What does B mean? Bisexual. Some of you are already. What if I just switch it up and I don't say the next letter in the sequence? What does T mean? Transgender. I saw someone put two-spirit. What does Q mean? Queer or questioning. Great, great. What does I mean? Intersex. Yes, intersex. We'll talk about what that means. What does A mean? Asexual or ace. Awesome. What does the plus mean? Is to be inclusive. Yep. Anyone else? Yeah, there are a lot more other ones, like pansexual. There's a lot. Many other identities that are not there. Yep. Awesome. Okay, cool. Let's go on to Anyone that doesn't fit into a binary system, pan, demi, gender fluid, etc. Awesome. Y'all are really knowledgeable. Let's go on to the next question. If this will load for me. Okay. I feel comfortable talking about LGBTQIA+ issues in my classroom. If you're somewhere in the middle, just go wherever feels right. Never. Thanks for the honesty. Appreciate. If you are joining us late, you can go to the link that's there, and the capitalization matters, and you can go ahead and answer some of these questions as we're going along. These are just statements that we're saying where we're at. So it looks like some people do feel really comfortable always, some people sometimes, some people never. So maybe that's part of the reason why you're here. And hopefully we'll learn something today that makes that go up a step or could put you at always. I put the link in the chat. It's also on the screen. All right, let's go to the next question. I feel comfortable talking about LGBTQIA+ issues in my school. So distinction between classroom and school. Interesting. Almost tied. Wow, looks like there's quite a contrast from the last one. It seems like more people are comfortable talking about it at school than in their classrooms. All right, next question. My school is safe and affirming for LGBTQ students and staff. All right, so sometimes. I have some of my staff here who are at my school. Should I say my opinion? I would say mostly always, but sometimes not. And I think that that's just the reality, and sometimes that's okay. All right, let's go on to the next one. I know how to address anti-LGBTQIA behaviors. Awesome, it seems like a lot of people always, most of us sometimes, some people never. I am gonna talk about this a little bit. By no means am I perfect at it, and I think that that's okay. But every day we learn a little more and grow a little more. Let's go on to the next question. My school has a GSA. My school calls it Gender Sexuality Alliance. Your school might call it something different. In the past, it's been called Gay Straight Alliance, but it has, from my understanding, since changed to be more inclusive of other genders and sexualities. Rainbow Bright, I like that. Yeah, lots of schools have different names. Seems like most of us do. Some of us are unsure. Hopefully this will empower you to find out and maybe get active in your school's GSA. And for those of you who don't have one, hopefully this will also empower you to make one or get people started on having one. My principal administration is supportive of this work. Saga, I like that. Glow, gay, lesbian, or whatever. These are all cute. Yeah, elementary schools, I haven't really heard much of them. Looks like most of us have supportive administration. I would say I definitely do too, and that's a powerful thing. Okay, that is the end of that. So I hope you enjoyed that little interactive piece. Let's go back to here. Yeah, let's just present here. Cool. All right, so you may have questions as we go along. You can feel free to put them in the chat or write them down for later. There'll be quite an opportunity for questions at the end. I just want to keep the presentation flowing, so I make sure I get through everything that I want to say. I put it'll be after approximately 60 to 70 minutes. That just depends how quickly I talk. Feel free to tweet about this or put it on Instagram. You can tag me at Kubiak Chemistry, and you can hashtag Queer Your Classroom. Sometimes people use hashtag Queer Ed. If you know of other queer education hashtags, go ahead and put them in the chat. I'd love to be able to follow more. All right, so we're gonna do a little exercise in empathy. Some of us said that we are part of the LGBTQ plus community and some of us are not. So here's a little exercise. There's a function in Zoom, where you can actually raise your hand. So I wanna pause my share. Ah, yes. And you can actually raise your hand. I'm just trying to find where I can. It's in the participants window. Thank you. Okay, yeah, so some of you are raising your hands. That's awesome. So is there anyone who's having trouble seeing that function? Well, lots of you are raising your hands. Love it. Getting a little practice here. Cool. Great. So let's go back here. I think it will show me, and you may be able to see everyone's, but this is just for yourself. You can feel free to raise your hand in the, like the raise hand feature, or you can physically raise your hand if you're on video. Whatever you feels comfortable or right to you. You also don't have to raise your hand if you feel uncomfortable. I don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable, but I do want you to hopefully feel empowered to do some self-reflection. So I'm going to read a statement, and if the statement applies to you, then you will raise your hand. Let me resume my share though. Okay, so raise your hand if you have ever had to ask someone to call you by a different name than your legal name. Stop sharing. I actually want to see what people are saying. 7 people raise their hand, awesome. Raise your hand if you've ever been told you act, quote, too girly or too manly. I'll raise my hand. Raise your hand if there were no visible lesbians, gay men, bisexual, or transgender people in your life growing up. Lots of us raising our hands. Raise your hand if you or someone you know has ever used the word fag or faggot. A lot more hands there. Raise your hand if you or someone you know has ever used the phrase, "That's so gay." Hands are going up left and right. That one's a really common one. Raise your hand if you ever avoided contact with someone because of their LGBTQ plus identity. I'll raise my hand for that one. We all change and grow. Raise your hand if you've ever heard derogatory comments about LGBTQ plus people and didn't speak up against it. Raise your hand if you've ever been sad or frustrated because an LGBTQ plus friend or family member didn't come out to you. Sometimes you have to think about these. Just go with your gut. What does your gut tell you? Raise your hand if you've ever felt reluctant to talk about LGBTQ plus issues because you didn't want to be rejected or labeled as LGBTQ plus yourself. Raise your hand if the bigotry against LGBTQ people has ever caused you to distance yourself from them. Raise your hand if you have never had to define your sexuality and or your gender to others. You've never had to. Raise your hand if you've ever felt afraid that an LGBTQ plus person may be attracted to you, and you were afraid because they were LGBTQ. Raise your hand if you think that if you or another family member were to come out to the family, you would be rejected or not welcome. I would have raised my hand in the past. Raise your hand if you've ever had LGBTQ plus content or examples included in your K through 12 coursework or in college. If you did have content included. This one always surprises me that there's more than I think there are, which is good. It's a good surprise. Raise your hand if you've ever not gone to an event or location because you were afraid that someone might see and then think that you are LGBTQ plus. Raise your hand if you've ever asked or wanted a friend who is LGBTQ plus to not talk about it in front of your other friends and or family members. And the last one, raise your hand if you've ever assumed that someone was heterosexual only to find out later they identified as LGBTQ plus. For me, sometimes it's the other way around. Okay, I'd love in the chat if you could put in some of your reflections on any of those questions that you may have, and I'll read some of them out. And you can lower your hands if they're still raised. Okay. Hey, oh, here's one. Okay. As a queer identifying individual teaching in a public school in the South, it's not that I'm uncomfortable discussing so much as I'm uncomfortable with the potential employment repercussions. Everything in, is this worth potential backlash or job repercussions? That's totally fair. Some of the answers don't surprise me since we live in a heteronormative world. I hadn't thought about some of those questions in a while. I'm ace, so a lot of this is easy for me to hide. Does it feel important for me to be out? Great, so many great reflections here. If I read them all, we'd be here for a while, but I will go back and read a lot of them. I'll read all of them a little bit later. Let me go back to sharing my screen. We're gonna share computer sound. Okay, where did my Here we go. Not this one. There we go. Okay, so what's coming next is we are going to watch a short video about why this work is important. And I think this video is pretty powerful. If folks want, we can watch the second video that I have here, but I'll show this first one because I really, really like it. I'm going to play it for 2 seconds, and if anyone in the chat could just say that they hear it, that way I can continue playing it. We can hear it? Great. Awesome. I'm becoming a pro at Zoom. Okay, so let me put on closed captioning.
Our world is full of brilliant detail, each one necessary for the rest of the picture to be fully appreciated. No one would dream of taking colors out of works of art. So then why do we omit essential historical facts from our history books? Lessons are being taught in our classrooms that leave enormous gaps in our understanding of how the LGBTQ community has contributed to our world. Right now, only 2 out of 10 students say they are taught positive representations of LGBTQ people, history, or events in the classroom. And while this might not seem like a big deal, you should know that 38.3% of LGBTQ students have been physically harassed at school, and 63% feel unsafe at school because of their sexual orientation. Sure, everyone has been teased at some point in life. But when less than 2% of your peers and not even 6% of your school staff are willing to stick up for you, that can have a very isolating effect. And keep in mind, this is just for students who have either realized they are gay or feel confident enough to have come out. There are so many more LGBTQ kids out there that are affected that we never hear about. So, what does that have to do with discussing positive representations of LGBTQ people? When students feel like they are understood or have something to relate to, it gives them a better sense of self-worth. By implementing LGBTQ inclusive curriculum, students, teachers, and school leaders promote respect and break down the stigmas regarding homosexuality and transgender people. In schools where GSAs have been initiated, verbal harassment has gone down by 18%. And because they improve safety, attendance rates are better, and the overall GPA is increased by 1.2 points. All of this, simply by students willing to stand up for other students. LGBTQ inclusive curriculum teaches all students about the contributions of gay and transgender Americans throughout history and the positive effects this community have on our country. The history is there. So let's start to fill in the blanks. October is LGBTQ History Month and a great time to get your GSA to do things at your school. Ask questions and speak up if you think your teachers could be doing more to educate students on the historical achievements of LGBTQ individuals. Thank your teachers and faculty that are already doing this, and advocate for staff training on implementing age and subject-specific LGBTQ inclusive curriculum. You can also research and teach yourselves about these important historical figures. But no matter how you look at it, the details of their accomplishments and contributions are a valuable and necessary color in the palette of what makes this nation and our world what it is today.
Okay. Any reflections on that video? I would say for me, when I first saw this video, it was like, whoa, I really need to be doing more. And like that last little bit about implementing staff training is kind of why I'm doing this. The GPA stat is fascinating. Yeah, definitely presenting role models is really, really important. Okay, so I want to talk about some statistics that kind of inform why this work is even more important than we may realize. So I have 3 numbers here. So this is from a Human Rights Campaign, HRC, study of 10,000 LGBTQ teens between the ages of 13 and 17 in 2012. It's a long time ago, but I feel like it's still super relevant. So I want you in the chat to say, well, first of all, let me say what these numbers represent. These are 3 numbers about a percentage of a population that a student is out to. Like, for instance, it could be parents, it could be friends, stuff like that. So 91% of LGBTQ identified youth are out to whom? For 91%. What do you think? Put it in the chat. 91% of LGBTQ youth are out to this group. Put in the chat what you think. Close friends, partners, friends, other friends, best friends, no one. Online friends. So this one is out to their closest friends. 91% are out to their closest friends. Let's do 64%. 64% of LGBTQ youth are out to who? Seeing a lot of teachers, seeing a lot of family, siblings, lots of teachers, adults. This one is actually 64% of LGBTQ youth are out to their classmates. So not necessarily their closest friends, but to their classmates. All right, 38%. 38% of LGBTQ youth are out to whom? Who do you think? Family, parents, family, family. Most people are saying family. This one is 38% of students who are LGBTQ youth are out to their teachers. Their teachers. When I found out this statistic, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I would have thought that kids, because they get so close to their teachers, especially at my school, I feel like we're all very close to our students and our students feel close to us. 38% of them are out to their teachers. And that means that I'm bad at mental math right now, but 62% are not. The number for parents, I don't actually know off the top of my head. I could look back at that study. I can find that out later. So to me, this just shows that this work is super important because not enough kids feel comfortable around their teachers to come out. All right, so I want to start with some, well, not start. I want to further give some information, but before I do that, I realized that I forgot to do something in my introduction, so I want to correct that. I introduced myself, but I did not give my pronouns. So my name is Jamie Kubiak, and my pronouns are he, him, his. I'll talk about why that's really important later. I apologize for not doing that right at the beginning. Let's talk about gender versus sex. So some of you, if you know GLSEN at all, it's the Gay and Lesbian Student Education Network. You may have seen the version on the left, which apparently is now an old version. As I was looking at GLSEN's website, they now have a new version. And so I thought it was interesting to kind of look at them side by side. Often in society, people think that gender and sex are the same thing, and they are not. So colloquially, like in conversation, they might be, but they really are not the same. And there's a lot of factors that play into that. So I want to focus on the new version of this like gender triangle. because I think it's more like inclusive or more encompassing of a lot of different ideas. So there are a lot of different aspects um, to gender, and your gender identity can come from three things. That is your expression, how you present yourself, your attribution, how you're perceived by others, and your body, how your body exists, how it changes. So that could come into play with like secondary sex characteristics, etc. Um, so what's interesting, and I like actually the new version because it leaves out the sex assigned at birth. It leaves out that um, this underlying idea that your sex assigned at birth has to match the gender identity that you have, because oftentimes they do not match up. So sex is very biological. It's generally what a child has been assigned at birth. It's not always correct, and it does not, as I said, match up with gender identity. Some children are born with both male, quote unquote, and female, quote unquote, genitalia. But in learning a lot about gender inclusive biology and gender inclusive sex education, it's important to not label sexual parts with genders. So they often match up, but they often don't. So it's actually, instead of saying quote unquote male genitalia, saying a penis. That might be shocking to some people, but that's the name of the organ, or saying ovaries or vagina, right? So those don't necessarily match up with someone's gender identity. So we often think of sex being XY and XX, and those are the only two options. In fact, that is not true. Those of us that know anything about biology know that science is too weird for that, to just be in these two nice clean buckets. There's actually this really nice Twitter thread that I read about it that I need to dig up, and I'll share with you all because it does a really good job of explaining why those two buckets are actually just an oversimplification of the reality. So you might be wondering what intersex is, in case you haven't heard that term, or you have heard that term and you're not quite sure what it means. If, for instance, you may have a penis and have ovaries, or you might have internal testes, or a lot of different variations that can come up that don't make you fit into one of those nice, clean, like two categories. That is what we call intersex. And some of the statistics, say that it's around 2% of the population. And I've had a really nice conversation with a biologist who said, we can talk all day about what the percentage is, but it doesn't actually matter what the percentage is, because there are people who are intersex, and therefore it matters to talk about it. And I think that was a really good point that was brought up to me, that we shouldn't have to justify why it's important to talk about it just based on the percentage. There are people who are intersex, and they exist. I love people talking in the chat. I'll go back to that in a little bit. So as I was saying before, gender is multifaceted, and it comes from a lot of different factors. And again, gender does not equal sex. So I really this is the hill that I will die on, that gender does not equal sex. And I've gotten into a lot of conversations with actually teachers, science teachers around the country, that seem to think that they are the same, and push a lot of those misconceptions that I think ultimately can harm individuals that are in the LGBTQ+ community. Yeah, I'm loving all the chat that's happening. Lots of really great comments. So one point I want to make is, you may have heard the term cisgender and transgender. Cisgender is when your gender and your sex align with each other. And I'll actually talk about later, one of the ways that I infuse some of this stuff in my chemistry classroom is talking about cis and trans configurations of molecules and what that actually means. So a cis molecule has the two parts that come off on the same side, and a trans molecule has the two parts that you care about going off on opposite sides. So cis really means that they match up, they're on the same side, and trans means that they do not. They don't match up. So your gender identity does not align to the sex you were assigned at birth. This is also an image that I super love that has also since been updated since I first found out about it. It's called the genderbread person. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but there's a little QR code there if you want to read more about this wonderful, wonderful graphic by, it's pronounced metrosexual.com, which I think is such a funny name, and I love it. So it kind of breaks down gender into a lot of different things and really separates out the sex from the gender. So gender identity is different from gender expression, as we said. Biological sex is different. And attraction is also a huge part. These three things can line up or they cannot. Like, for instance, you might be, identify as a man. You might be biologically a male, quote unquote, and you might be attracted to men. For me, that is my situation. If I didn't already say, yes, I am super gay. So that is why I really, really super care about this work. So this is a really great graphic. I think it's really great to share with students, especially in like a health classroom or really even like a science classroom or any sort of classroom. The genderbread is really, really great, and I really love it. By the way, these slides I'm going to share with you, so you'll start to see some links later on with resources. Don't feel like you have to like write them down or take a picture. Like, all of this will be sent to you, so don't worry about that. I want to talk about some simple strategies for classrooms that you can implement very, very easily in your own classroom, starting literally tomorrow. Even though a lot of us are now virtual teaching, I think that this is still relevant and still really easy to do. So I have like two columns here. There's instead of doing blank, do this thing next to it instead. So instead of saying ladies and gentlemen or boys and girls, instead you could say scientists or mathematicians or historians, students, everyone. Anything that doesn't reinforce that gender binary, that those are the only two options. Supporting the binary explicitly and implicitly denies anything outside of that binary existing. You wouldn't tell a student that that they aren't Black or that they're not Hispanic if they happen to be both. So why would you tell a student that they weren't something that they aren't? You shouldn't tell a group of students that boys and girls or men and women or ladies and gentlemen are the only options. What happens if you're a student who does not feel like a lady or does not feel like a gentleman? Whenever I hear ladies and gentlemen, I cringe a little bit. It's so ingrained in our society, but since I really started to think about it, I'm not a gentleman by any means. I can be very rude. I am not gentle all the time. So don't call me a gentleman. Instead of assuming my gender identity or reinforcing the binary, it would be really, really great if instead we said something that encompassed more people. I see some people putting in what they do in their classrooms, and I love it. I'm going to shout out one of my colleagues, Lisa, who calls all of her students little chickens, and I think that that's so adorable. It's gender neutral. It's great. It doesn't make students feel left out if they're not part of that binary. Intrepid stargazers, that one's a really, really good one. So the next one, instead of assuming gender identity and misgendering someone with incorrect pronouns, you want to ask students for their gender pronouns. You want to center the student in what their experience is and what is happening with them. I will say that I've accidentally misgendered a student, and I think that that ruined our relationship for a while, and unfortunately, that kind of was what it was. I apologized, tried to move on, but we all make mistakes. And I think that that is important to note, that you're never going to be perfect, and that's okay. But committing to being better is one of the best things that you can do. Instead of separating by gender or into boys versus girls for like teams or lines or any of that, you can be more creative. You are totally creative enough to come up with some other way to separate groups. If you want to put in the chat some way that you separate kids into groups, that would be really great too. I see people talking about monikers. Yeah, so there's like Mrs. and Miss, and like men just have Mr. So like, why do we have to, have this moniker that, represents that a woman has been married? It's just ridiculous. Which is why I really like the moniker. I'm going to put it in the chat. It's Mix, MX. I see a lot of folks using that, and I think it's really, really great. It doesn't just have to be for someone who doesn't fit the gender binary. It would be great if we all, use that instead of, having to identify people in the gender binary. So here's one that actually I did a lot, especially coming from the Midwest, is instead of saying guys to mean everyone, we do that a lot. And even in New York City, it happens. Do this, say everyone, or y'all, or you all. I stole y'all from my sister. My sister lives in Texas now, and she used to say, or she still says y'all, how y'all doing? And I think it's, a really great way to show that being a guy isn't the only option. I know that in Spanish as well, if there's one guy in the group, then the whole group is referred to as like ellos. Midwest represent. Yeah. Anything that in our language that comes up, you really start to think about these things, and it starts to really open your eyes to the fact that you might be reinforcing gender binaries, you might be reinforcing the patriarchy, and down with the patriarchy, am I right? Peeps is great. Petition to call students acids and bases. That is the only binary I will accept. So, as a chemistry teacher. If you're in New York City specifically, the chancellor's regulations strictly prohibit a lot of these behaviors. So you want to make sure that you're not actually doing some of these things. Great. Also, instead of assuming that all students are straight, do this. Behave like there are LGBTQIA+ students in your room in school, because there are. I've heard a lot that people say like, oh, like, I don't have any gay kids in my class, like, so I don't need to worry about this. I'm hearing PH as a spectrum. Thank you for, oh, I love this. This is so great. You all are so funny. But as I was saying, just because you think that there aren't queer students in your room or your school, there are. They just may not feel comfortable enough to tell you. And as we said before, 38% of students are out to their teachers, so 62% of them are not. Oh, I love this. You all are giving me so many great ideas to include later. Great. So here are some strategies for schools. I'll talk about ones that are like for schools and classrooms in general on the next slide. But these are some ones that really irk my soul, that they happen. So I'm trying really hard to fight against them. So we want to avoid traditions that reinforce the gender binary, like prom king, prom queen, anything that would make someone who is not a boy or not a girl feel left out, is really important to make sure that they feel included as well. And I always, tradition I feel like is a dangerous word, because we've always done it that way, I think is really, not the best way to think about things, especially if it's going to make some students feel more comfortable or make people in general feel more comfortable. So instead of having a dress code that strictly prohibits like girls from doing X or boys from doing X, most often it is about like the patriarchy and restricting the girls into doing things because they don't want girls to be too sexual for men. And I think that is just flat out disgusting. But beyond that, having a gender neutral dress code that like no one can show shoulders, no one can do whatever, is better than just saying, no, the girls can't, or just the girls have to do X. It's really important that, we don't say that like everyone who we think is a girl wears a skirt. It's really important that we make sure that, we're having dress codes and policies that don't stigmatize people who are not on the binary. Something that can be really great is having a gender neutral bathroom for students and a separate one for staff. My school has both. I'm very fortunate to be in New York City because it's now like a requirement that schools have a gender neutral bathroom for students. My GSA even had like a ribbon cutting ceremony. It was very, very cute. Hopefully your school or your district or your state has policies to protect LGBTQIA+ students against discrimination. I know being in New York City, we kind of are in a bubble and we have these protections, and I recognize that across the country that is not the case, especially in certain states. So hopefully you can be the one to advocate for some of these changes. Lobby your Congress people in your state, in your city, whatever, all of your politicians to make sure that we're protecting our students against discrimination in our schools specifically and otherwise. Another one that I came across that I was thinking a lot about is like elementary schools. A lot will do like Mother's Day, Father's Day stuff, which can reinforce the gender binary. So we want to have observations that can be inclusive of all families and family structures that may not have a mom and a dad, because that is not the reality of a lot of families. Great, simple strategies for schools and for classrooms. So you want to avoid microaggressions. So I'll just give a definition of what a microaggression is. A microaggression is a statement, action, or incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as a racial or ethnic minority. So here are some that I've heard about the LGBTQ plus community that some of these have been said to me and are quite frankly upsetting. Who's the man in the relationship? I had a friend who said that to me when I told her that I was dating my now husband. Well, who's the man? I said, well, we're both men. That's kind of the point. Someone said, oh, I have a cousin or brother or sister just like you. Oh, just like me, every single little bit. Just because we're also queer doesn't mean we have everything in common. Here's one I hear a lot that's really, really awful, whether explicitly or implicitly. Bisexual people should just choose. Or you aren't bi, you have a boyfriend. Or you aren't bi, you have a girlfriend. So you're not bi. Or I have a gay friend that you should meet. Like, just because we're gay doesn't mean that I necessarily will get along with them. Or I had someone do this to me. This is my gay friend. Identifying your friend as your gay friend or your bi friend or your trans friend or your lesbian friend is really, really awful. Don't do that. I also had someone say this to me as I was telling them about some of this stuff. This is all just too much stuff to remember. Can it just be simpler? And I thought that that was really, really, striking to me because I think the whole point of the LGBTQ plus community, that plus, is that we're trying to be inclusive of all, and definitions are expanding and people are feeling more comfortable to finally be themselves. And as we learn and grow and have language to represent that, I think it's important that we're able to name things if people need a name for it. So this may seem like a lot, but I think that ultimately it really matters. The next one, this is like another hill that I'm gonna die on, is language is really, really important. For instance, one thing that I'm trying to get my school to do, and just schools in general, is instead of calling students freshmen when they're in the 9th grade, it has the word men in it, and it kind of reinforces the binary. But what happens if you're not a man? I know that some people say, oh, like, I am not a man and it doesn't offend me, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect our women who are 9th graders. It doesn't affect our people who are not men, whoever that is, that are in the 9th grade. So I think one thing you could change it to is 9th graders or first years or something, or frosh. It doesn't matter. Just coming up with something that can really change the way that we talk about a group of students to not reinforce the gender binary and not promote the patriarchy. Um, I want to make sure that you avoid belittling the importance of student identity. So I've heard like, we don't have trans kids here. Really upsetting because you most likely do. The statistics support the fact that there are probably trans students and there are queer students at your school and in your classroom. I talked about that a little earlier. I've had someone say, we're all human, it doesn't matter. So like, let's just let it be. I think that that can be really damaging because it's erasing the experience of someone's identity. And we wouldn't like want to say, oh, like, you know, we're all human, so we're not going to talk about race. Like, that's just not okay. So in the same way, we don't want to belittle people's experience. So instead, we want to celebrate diversity, and we want to make sure that you know, we're welcoming to students in our communities. So the other thing that you can do is address homophobic, transphobic, or homo-violent comments in the classroom or hallway. So the reason I say homo-violent is actually, so I talked about the bubble of New York. In New York City specifically, I've had people shout some very, very angry things at me about my sexuality. Complete strangers that were very, very borderline unviolent. And I see that instead of homophobic or transphobic, I see these as acts of violence, especially microaggressions, especially when you're shouting at someone. You know, these are all little cuts that are on your hand that may not look like they're going to hurt, but enough of them will eventually make you bleed. You know, saying things like no homo or that's gay. You know, students also can have coded language for these things. So sometimes it's, if you're not really sure what a student is saying, it's kind of like you could ask them like, hey, what does that mean? So I found out that at my school, if a student says, hey, yo, in like a specific way with a specific intonation, that actually means, oh, no homo. They just cut off the no homo because they heard, oh, we can't say no homo, so we'll just say the other part. So it's really important that we listen to the nuances of language because there are a lot of them, and it can have a lasting impact if students hear these. So I want to talk about something that I have been doing for a couple years, but I kind of formalized in a nice way that you can definitely feel free to steal. This is like a way that I get to know students. So I didn't actually create this. I adapted it from a Facebook post that I found, I think like last August. So I asked them their name, what should I call you, the pronunciation. So I think it's important to ask kids how they want to be addressed. I myself never went by my legal name ever. So if a teacher had asked me like, what should I call you? It really would have meant the world. And that had nothing to do with my identity as a queer student. But so I think that this has far reaching implications that are beyond just helping queer students. Pronunciation is also really, really important. I just want to point out that like saying students' names the way they're meant to be said is important. If a kid says, oh, no, it's okay, like I've had a lot of teachers say, oh, they told me it's fine that I don't know how to say their name. And I'm like, well, of course they're going to say that to you because they don't want to stand up or they don't feel empowered enough to stand up to you, someone in power, to be able to correct them. I have every kid fill out the pronunciation. Even I had a student named Joy, and she said, well, you know how to pronounce my name. And I said, just assume that I have no idea. I've never spoken English before. And even she wrote one. So it's really important that you ask pronunciations. I have them write it out, and I give them an example with how to do my last name, Koobeeack, Kubiak. For gender pronouns, I have them circle, or they can add their own. There's space to the side where they can do that. I get asked a lot about like how I introduce this. So what I do is, you know, I give examples. So I say, okay, if you were going to talk about me, you would say, I love Mr. Kubiak. He is my favorite teacher. I want to be like him. His chemistry jokes are the best. And as soon as I put it in that context, students go, oh, okay, I know exactly what you're talking about. And then they know what their gender pronouns are. I also, like, in terms of safety of students, I always say, listen, we're just meeting. So you may not feel comfortable with telling me what your gender pronouns are yet, or ever, and that's okay. But I want you to know that I will respect your pronouns, um, and that I will keep them confidential if that is what you want me to do. The only person reading this is me. I'm not sharing it with other teachers or anyone else, so feel free to please be honest. And then I ask these 3 questions at the bottom. May I use these pronouns in front of class? May I use these pronouns if I contact your family? Would you like me to follow up privately about your pronouns? The other thing, I mentioned earlier about pronouns is it's important to do it in your introduction. So when I introduce myself, I also give my pronouns to students. And everyone can use gender pronouns. Even elementary school kids, younger kids are using them. If they can say words and form sentences, they're using gender pronouns. So I've heard a lot that like it's too much for elementary kids to understand. But if you use simple sentences to help reinforce the idea, I think it can go a long way. I also think it's important to note that student pronouns can change. They could change from week to week, and that's okay, and that's totally cool. So it's important to not just ask this at the beginning of the year, but to ask it, maybe at least twice or whatever kind of feels comfortable or right to you. I know that I ask at the beginning of each semester, and then I'll probably check in again once throughout each semester just to make sure that I'm using the correct pronouns. So we used to say preferred pronouns, and I want to point out that preferred word implies that like, oh, it's just my preference that I'm a man. Like, no, I am a man. Or, it kind of stigmatizes and erases the experience. So instead of preferred gender pronouns, just gender pronouns or pronouns. It's really important that we're specific about our language. Also, the last question, with whom do you live, grandparents, parents, siblings, I'm really intentional about using gender neutral language in everything that I do. So I say parents instead of mom or dad, though I should add guardians, so that's a push for myself. Siblings instead of brothers and sisters. The only binary that's here is dog, cat. So I think that one is okay. So I've had a lot of people ask what to do if a student comes out to you. So I want to talk about this kind of quickly because I think a lot of this is, hopefully self-explanatory but makes sense. But I want to point out a couple of things. So you should do this: listen more than you speak, offer support to students, validate their experience, name their courage, ask compassionate questions, and challenge your own societal beliefs and expectations. I'm coming from Michigan, where it's very, very rural. And there's a lot of things that were instilled in me about like how society should be and what things should be like. And, I have to break a lot of that in order to really support my students and support myself. One thing I want to say about naming courage, whenever a student comes out to me, I always say, you're in high school and you're coming out to me like you are so much braver than I could ever be. Because when I was in high school, the last thing I would have ever done is told a teacher or anyone, because I didn't even come out till college. And I think that like naming that courage makes students feel really like confident and powerful in their decision to come out. So you should not do this. Don't make assumptions. Don't say, are you sure? That is really awful. I think someone said that to me when I came out to them, and I was like, yeah, I'm sure. I wouldn't be telling you this if I wasn't. Don't tell other teachers, staff, or parents without the student permission. I think it's important to keep student confidentiality intact, unless, of course, they give you permission. If you can always ask, like, are you out to other teachers? Are you out to anyone in the building? Are you out to your parents? And if they say yes, then you can follow up and kind of figure out if you're allowed to talk about it with them. Don't say it's just a phase or you're just confused, or say, oh, I knew that already. Yeah, you don't want to make it feel like, even if you did know, like even if you had an inkling, you don't want to say that to a student because that can alienate them, and they took a really big step by coming out to you. I'm going to skip this slide for just a second and come back, because I want to talk about addressing homophobic language and behaviors, and then I'll spend the last little bit talking about some resources and like how to incorporate some of this stuff in your classroom. So here are some steps to take to address homophobic language and behaviors. And I first want to name that this is really, really hard. As someone who is queer, when I had some of these things happening in my classroom the first couple of years of teaching, I was not addressing it. And in fact, I'm going to share with you a story where I told as part of my like MFA fellowship about like being a gay teacher and like the first time I actually came out to kids and what that was like. It was a process. So by no means are you going to be perfect. I am not perfect. I'm still learning every day about how to be a little bit better about addressing some of these things in my classroom and at my school. So you want to address it immediately. Do not wait. If you wait, then what you're doing is you're essentially saying, this is okay. I'm going to let it slide. You're implying that it's fine. You want to label the behavior. You want to describe what was said without judgment or bias. You want to create a teachable moment where you educate. We're educators. That's, our job is to teach and teach children. So we really should be using this moment to use our power to influence kids in a really positive way. You should center the behaviors or the language, not the students involved. You don't want to be like, well, it really, really upset Jamie when you called him gay. Like, we don't want to bring out, open a wound. We want to like create a moment where we talk about what language was used or what behavior was used. Don't shame students. Even if, it's really hard to not do that, I have to stop myself from being like, well, you're just wrong, because, that actually isn't going to help someone learn. And we want to make sure that we teach people instead of vilify them. You want to support the targeted student and ask the student what they want. This can be private. That's probably what I would suggest, unless it kind of feels right to do it in the moment in front of others. You need to show that student that was targeted that you are an ally. You need to ask them if they'd like to speak to a counselor. If it's really, really bad, you might want to bring it up to a counselor regardless of what the student says. But I think it is important to ask, like, hey, what you went through was really tough. It's probably a good idea to talk to a counselor. Would you be okay with that? We want to make sure that students feel supported. You want to hold students accountable to whatever extent possible in your school, your state, your district. If you have a set of rules or a handbook, you want to use it equally across all instances and give consequences when they should be given. That can be really hard if there's not rules in place in your school, in your state, in your district. In New York City specifically, we have a lot of really specific guidelines about this, so it makes the work a little bit easier. So like I said, if you don't have a lot of those things in your state or your district, advocate for them. Advocate to be able to hold students accountable for their homophobic or homoviolent behaviors. So here are just some sentence starters or phrases that you could use in these tough conversations. That language is unacceptable in this school, this classroom, or at Park East, like my school. You could say, I heard you say blank. That's derogatory. It's name calling. It's bullying. You could say, what do you mean by that? You could ask instead of just assuming. You may ask, like, how might a gay, bi, trans, or queer person feel if they heard that? I want to go back to some sample ideas of how we can incorporate things in lessons, projects, or units. So as a chemistry teacher, now from this chat, when I bring up the pH scale, I'm definitely going to talk about spectra and binaries and all of that. So thank you for that idea in the chat. Also, when we talk about the visible spectrum, talking about rainbows and all of that, it's pretty clear connection that can be made to talk about what a spectrum is. So I read a book with some of my students called The Disappearing Spoon, and there's not explicitly anything about LGBTQ people, but I ask them as part of the project that they do to like research an LGBTQ scientist because it wasn't talked about in the book, and say what their contribution was. In living environment, if you're from New York or biology, you could talk about gender versus sex, nature versus nurture. There's a really, really great resource by someone that I've met in doing this work, Sam Long. I'm not sure if he's here. I thought he was coming, but genderinclusivebiology.com is a website that he has actually started with a couple other people. I just want to show you this website is really, really great. There's a lot of resources and a lot of links just to like make your classroom, your biology classroom or your health classroom, really, really gender inclusive. So this is in the resources, so don't feel like you have to like take a picture or write it down or anything. It's gonna come. I don't really, I was signed out. Give me a second. While I'm signing back in, let me look at the chat. Calling out and calling in, I like that. Gender inclusive biology, great. I'm so glad that you mentioned that resource, and I mentioned it too. Okay, so for health, we want to, sorry for my computer being slow. We want to make sure that our health education is also trans inclusive, because if it's not, it can really stigmatize and like make students feel like they're not welcome. Okay, come on. Okay. Again, like talking about parts versus talking about like male genitalia or female genitalia. For math, word problems, really easy to just change the names and make them non-heteronormative and like straight. So like if there's some sort of relationship, it doesn't have to be straight. If you have a statistics class, like if you're doing surveys, you know, if you're asking about like gender, having more options than just male and female. History, you can feature queer historical figures. English, there's lots of literature that is queer. Again, I'm going to shout out my colleague Lisa, who reads Rainbow Boys with our 9th graders. And I know that that's really powerful for creating an inclusive space in her classroom. Foreign language, you could talk about gender pronouns. So what I want to say is that I have a whole Google Drive that I've started to build that I'm hoping that you all will add things to. And this will be like a community Google Drive of curricular materials. So I've kind of broken it down by subject. And there's not a lot in everything yet, but there will be. Someone was asking about earth science. So I don't have a lot here, but like I would love to work with you and like build this up so that we can share this across the country and across the world so that people can have something easy to go to be able to find it. So there's, if this will load, just a couple of like generic things. I don't have like specific earth science examples. So if you have any ideas, feel free to put them in the chat. One website that I really, really love is 500queerscientists.com. They feature queer scientists, and maybe you could have one of them like Skype into your classroom. Skype a Scientist is also like another really, really good resource. Okay, so I want to give some actionable steps for you to follow in order to incorporate some of this into your work as you're currently doing it. So you want to figure out where you're at currently and work to increase your capacity for understanding. Remembering that everyone is at a different journey of understanding all of this. I feel like I'm pretty far along, given that I'm queer, but there's always stuff that I'm learning. And I think that that's really important, is that like you're never going to know everything, but you can always learn more. And you can always make it a more safe space for your students. You want to evaluate your current curriculum and assess opportunities for inclusion. You want to collaborate with your colleagues, with me. I'm totally willing to talk to you about like how to incorporate some of this stuff in your classroom. You want to make your classroom, your curriculum, and your schools more affirming. And also what's really important to do is to self-reflect and not take feedback personally. You know, it's natural to be defensive and to not want to reflect on your practice. And it might get uncomfortable. In fact, I've been really uncomfortable doing a lot of this work, but I think that that uncomfortableness is really powerful, and it's what allows us to grow. Because if we were always complacent, we would never grow. Imagine how students who aren't represented in their classes feel. As a queer kid growing up in Michigan, I saw nothing positive about queer people in my curriculum or around me. And so I never felt safe to come out until I got to college, where it felt like it was okay. So I think that that's hopefully something that you take with you. Some final thoughts before we do Q&A. Start small. You don't have to immediately change everything to be LGBTQ plus in your curriculum. That would be very hard to do, especially as we're rebuilding our curriculum in this remote learning environment. It's also not enough to just throw up a poster in your classroom or have up a flag. That can go a long way, but you want to make sure that you're authentic in it. If you're just throwing up a poster because it's like a poster, because you're like, oh, I checked off the box, then that's probably not as authentic and helpful to students as actually, engaging them in conversations about it. I have obviously a bunch of queer paraphernalia all over my classroom, including pictures of me and my husband. But I'm intentional about bringing it up and talking about it. I think it's really important to note that LGBTQ plus queer lives are on the line, especially trans girls of color. The mortality rate of trans women of color is far beyond that of almost every demographic. In fact, the average life expectancy of a trans woman of color is 30 years, which is really, really sad. So literally lives are on the line with this work, and hopefully you see this as imperative to do because it can save lives. You want to make sure that you're a role model and an upstander for our students. So when those things come up, you want to make sure that you can address them. You don't have to be perfect, but address it. Definitely address it. I really encourage you to do that. Because letting it go can say a lot more. And unfortunately, that will go a long way. Don't reinvent the wheel. You don't have to, make things up, because there are so many things out there. I want to you don't have to write these down or take a picture. Again, I'm going to send this to you. But I want to point out a couple of really important things. Google is the world is your oyster. Go and find things. GLSEN is a really great resource. There's a lot of really, really, really great stuff here, and especially in this Queer Your Classroom curricular materials. I found a lot of stuff for different subject areas. So hopefully you can find something there that speaks to you and helps you and is a jumping off point to you incorporating this into your classroom. I'm going to leave this up, but I'm actually going to stop sharing. And now what I want to do is take some questions. So we have it technically till 7:30, but we could go over if the vibe is right. I want to answer any questions that you might have. So here's what we'll do. If you have one and you want to speak it out loud, please raise your hand, and then I can unmute you, and then I'll try to be as fair as possible, and then have you ask some questions. You can definitely put things in the chat too, because this chat should save automatically, and I'm gonna go back and read it later. That way I can follow things up in emails or whatever. Okay, so I see a couple people have some questions, so I'm gonna unmute you, Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca. You're unmuted.
Oh, I don't think I meant to say anything. I was walking through the other room, but this has been super helpful, because everything you said, as a middle school teacher, these kids don't really even know themselves yet. Some of them do, but some of them really don't. So to be that supportive person that they have that they can trust is huge.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Genevieve, I hope I say people's names right. If I do, feel free to correct me. I'm going to unmute you.
All right, thanks. That's correct. Something I've been wrestling with for a while is trying to figure out, if you do, overnight trips, camping trips, whatever, that I've always struggled with the fact that, we have to separate people by our perceived, what it's in the health class is another thing, but for me, it's the overnight trips and where people are sharing closed spaces, and how to even approach that.
Yeah, I think that it's tough because there's always going to be pushback, but ultimately we got to try to do the right thing. So what I'll say is that I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, people in New York City, I believe that in New York City, on like school trips, students aren't allowed to be separated by perceived gender. But yes, we do run into this in New York.
That's not true on overnight trips, actually. I've had this recently.
Yeah, so it's hard because there's I can't like solve the problem right now,
Right.
but I can say that like it's really important that if a student comes forward and says like, I'm being put with the boys or I'm being put with the girls and I don't feel comfortable being there, that we advocate as much as we can for that student to be where they feel most comfortable.
Right.
Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, if anybody has ideas, that's just between that and health classes and other things it's just something that I don't have any good solutions for. And I've recently moved from California to North Carolina, so it's way different here, and I'm struggling a lot more than I had in the past.
Yeah, it's me too sometimes, even in New York City. So
Yeah.
we're all in this together, really. Thank you. I see other people raising their hands. Jessica, I'm going to unmute you.
Hi. I have a question back from the beginning when you were talking about anatomy. So not saying, female organs, but saying, vagina, or male organs, penis. Is that because students are getting offended or confused?
I would say that it's not so much about offense, but I think that like it really comes down to like precision of language, because if we just were female is about gender and anatomy is not necessarily related to the gender, right? So I think it's also important to not like, just like I said before, like about science, the thing that happens with science is we put things into like 2 or 3 very nice buckets because it's easy to understand, but it also like kind of erases a lot of the beautiful complexity of it, where like someone who has a vagina, like it's not female genitalia if they're not a female, right? They could be a trans man who has a vagina, but they're not female.
Okay. Yeah, and I understand that. And I try to make a point in my classroom to say, this is biological sex. You have an X chromosome. Instead of using the word gender, I just want to make sure, I do want to make sure that the language is being inclusive, but at the same time is still portraying, the science that, yes, you were born female because you have 2 X chromosomes. However, you do not feel, that your gender represents that, and that's perfectly okay. So it's like, where's that sentence or that conversation?
I think what you just said is great. I think like it's hard to distill it down to a sentence. If anyone has an idea for that, like by all means, is biological sex a workaround? I'm by no means am the expert on this, so anyway, I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think, like giving the complex explanation is important for kids, that like the world is complex. So sometimes we need complex explanations that take more than, a sentence. Thank you. Pooja, I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, I actually was just raising my hand to add to that. I do teach biology, and when I talk about gender and sex, I talk about both of them as a spectrum. And when you're talking about, and like sex, the existence of intersex people means that it is a spectrum. And outside of the human species, like us, there are multiple genders in different organisms, plants as well as animals. So I encourage you to like look up like sex, non-binary species or something like that if you would like. And I think the biologically female and the biologically male still kind of falls into this trap that like this is that gender and that's another one. I think the thing that Jamie had brought up earlier was about just naming the part. like being like penis, it's like a penis, and like this is like a vulva, and this is has a vagina, and like these are the parts if you are talking about those things. And I would also just sort of throw out there that like when you're talking about gender and trans people, two last thoughts. One, we don't actually know most, like a lot of our, like someone had mentioned earlier, like in middle school, kids don't really know themselves, and some do and some don't. And in any given moment, you don't actually know if you have trans students, right? And you don't actually know if you have queer students. And so you don't, it's never, it's like, in our school, one of the things that keeps coming up when we talk about trans, I don't think I have any like coworkers here, so I think I can like call my school out a little bit. One of the things that keeps coming out is people are like, well, we don't have any trans students. And it's like, okay, we don't know that you don't have trans students because they're never gonna come out to you if you're never using like gender inclusive and trans friendly language. And a lot of them don't know. And most likely you do have trans students. So like we do have to be talking as if you have trans students.
Yeah.
So the points where the like sex is not a binary in nature. So even the XX, there are people who have multiple, like just different chromosomal structures. So there are people on other species as well. So sex is not, I would not consider, and I don't tell my students that sex is a binary. And I try to actively try to tell them that it's not a binary. I try to talk about gender as not like a preference or a choice, or like they feel this way or like they feel that way, like they're born like this but they feel this way, but actually that like that is who they are. I try to affirm that as their real identity. And yeah, you don't know who's trans and who's not, and you don't know who's queer and who's not, so you should always be talking to all students and all people probably as in an inclusive way. Sorry, those were not questions. I was just thinking a lot about trans stuff while we were talking about this.
Thank you.
I just wanted to weigh in as a biology person.
Great, thank you. I'm going to unmute Lauren.
Oh, awesome. I just wanted to say, like, I think it is also important to remember that even if you don't have trans students in your class, and even if you don't have queer students in your class, just everyone in that class, just by statistics, is going to know someone that is trans or that is queer, and that they need to be like exposed to the proper ways to talk about it and to have like an idea that this is normal and this isn't, so that when they do maybe have someone that they're close to come out to them, like they have some frame of reference for it. So like I just wanted to comment that I think it's important for all the students, even the ones that like aren't queer or trans. Like I think it's they really need role models in how to behave as well.
Absolutely. I just want to add to that and say that, thank you, Lauren. I lost my train of thought. Oh, like someone said something to me once, like I always get in Facebook arguments and they're like, well, you're never going to convince the person that you're arguing with. And then I always kind of think, but wait, it's not just about the people that you're arguing with, it's about the people that are watching. And sometimes kids are watching, kids are sponges, they're listening, so they will pick up on what you say and what you do. And if you are affirming queer identities, they'll pick up on that. So yeah, I think it's important not just for queer kids, but for every kid to hear this. Great, thank you. I'm going to unmute you, Dorothy.
Yeah, so I teach in New York City. And so with all of the loveliness that is going on right now, I have several students that are queer and are out and can be themselves at school, but they are currently trapped in apartments with parents that either do not know that they are queer or strongly disapprove that they are queer. And I'm trying to figure out anything that I can do to help them in their mental health.
Great. That's an amazing question that I think definitely I've been thinking about, because I am also the GSA advisor with my colleague Anne Lenzini, who is amazing. So we have started actually a Google Classroom with our GSA kids, and it's been a little bit of a challenge to get them to reply. I know that they're stressed out, so we're definitely not mad at them or not like holding it against them, but just being visible about them having that space on Google Classroom virtually, that you could maybe even Zoom with them and have a meeting still. That, you know, let's say parents or guardians go out to go grocery shopping, like they could text you and then like you could Zoom real quick like while they're out and kind of like let them vent for a little bit. There are also a lot of really good resources with the Trevor Project that has texting now, that like if they're especially in distress about it, they could reach out to the Trevor Project, and I know that they don't have to speak on the phone and say anything out loud, so that they could keep their secrecy and everything. I hope that helps. I'm going to unmute you, Jennifer.
Hi, my classroom is okay, I think. My biggest issue is with parents. I had put on my opening of the year, you know, who are you? Let me get your contact. And I was all proud of myself because I said parent one and parent/guardian one instead of mom and dad. But I had asked for pronouns of the student on that, and I guess maybe that's what I did wrong because it went home. I got a lot of pushback from parents, like, why are you asking this? What are you trying to do to my kid? What's the best way to try to mitigate the parent impact and explain what we're trying to do?
Yeah, that's the question of the century. I think that one thing, like you kind of said, was putting it on the parents facing survey, maybe was a little activating for them. So like I only put it on my student facing survey, and it's something that parents don't ever see. In terms of like I've had trans students before where the parent was definitely not accepting. And it's hard because, you know, I want to argue with them, but, you know, at the end of the day, like, I think my focus generally just goes on supporting the student in whatever way that I can, because, you know, I can try to teach a parent and try to make them, you know, kind of see the light and be better and support their kid. But at the end of the day, I know that I may be more effective in supporting the student than convincing the parent. But that's just me personally. So if anyone has any great ideas about how to get parents on board, definitely put them in the chat or raise your hand or anything. There was one that kind of came to mind. I saw this really beautiful interaction of this teacher that like was talking to a parent about their trans child, and the parent was like so up in arms about it because they didn't know or whatever, and the teacher just beautifully like responded and was like, hey, you want what's best for your kid, right? Isn't that what we both want? And then like really like came at it from like a compassionate place, and kind of brought them around to being like, yeah, you know, I really do want what's best for my kid, and I want to support them, and I want to love them. Hopefully that's what all parents want to do. And so maybe leveraging that might be something that's really useful or beneficial. Any other questions? You can feel free to raise your hand or, Amber. Hi, Amber.
Hi, I'm from Missouri, and in the Bible Belt especially, a lot of pro-LGBT type of conversation is seen as anti-Christian, and it's really hard to like try to advocate for pro-LGBT like inclusivity and language and stuff like that when it's seen as an attack on Christianity. And it's to the point where like most of the administrators at the school that I went to would not allow any teachers to talk about like any sort of ally services and stuff like that. And I was wondering if like there was any, because I've tried for years, but I haven't found like a super effective way in getting through to people like that it's an important thing we should talk about and that it's not anti-Christian. But I didn't know if you had any like tips or tricks in trying to address something like that.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm the best person to ask about the whole like Christian thing, because I myself am a reformed recovering Catholic. So hopefully that doesn't offend anyone. I just personally, like, religion's not my thing. So because to me, I always kind of viewed religion as like oppressive of LGBTQ people, and I know that that is not the case in every religious sect, as I've really come to learn. And those are the ones that I'm really happy exist. Good for them. And I think that maybe if in your community there are any of those types of churches that are really, really affirming of LGBTQ people, maybe leveraging them to have some of these conversations, because I am definitely not an expert in being able to do that. Hopefully that helps. Munoz, hey, I'm gonna unmute you. Are you there, Munoz? Where'd you go? I guess you left. Maybe it was an accident. All right, Jessica, I'm gonna unmute you.
Hey, round two. I had a question about how to get administration to help. Not that our administration is unhelpful. I think that they are certainly wanting to make sure our school is safe for everyone. I just know that when I talk with students, they say that they do get the snickering and the side comments and harassment in the hallway, and they still feel like there's no punishment for it. You know, if a girl wears a weird shirt, you know, there's a punishment for that, or consequence. But for their harassment, they feel like there isn't. So is there a way to approach admin to help address that in like school policy?
So what I will say about admin, I've been fortunate enough to have admin. I think Susie might still be here. She might have left already. That's supportive of this work, so I haven't had a lot of pushback. But there is a really good, let me share my screen again and show you. This is my cat, by the way. There's a really good resource that GLSEN has. It's the Safe Space Kit. That actually has a whole thing about like administration that I think is really, really helpful, that hopefully maybe will help you. While I have this up, I want to show this because I see some folks that have left, and I wanted them to fill out this feedback survey for me. So you don't have to do it right now, but there's a QR code here. There's also a bit.ly. That is a capital O, it's not a 0. If you want to give me some feedback, I'll also send this link in my like follow-up email if you want to give me feedback there. Also, I'm going to do this now. I forgot. So you can, like I said, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. That's my teacher Instagram and teacher Twitter. And you can feel free to email me if you have follow-up questions. We're definitely not done, but like you don't have to like feel like you have to leave now, but I just wanted to throw this out there before everyone left like right at the end. So I will keep that up for a second, and then I'm going to stop sharing again. I also, let me just put this link in the chat. Stop sharing. Okay. Other questions? Anything, everything goes. You can unmute yourself too if you don't want to wait for me to unmute you. You all have been super great about keeping yourselves muted, so I trust that you know what to do. Munoz, did you figure out your mic? Nope. You can type your question. Maybe it was super long though. Okay. Well, I have your undivided attention. I want to reiterate the like Google Drive that I was talking about. I'm going to put the link to that Google Drive in this chat. This is like an open Google Drive. You can share it with whomever. You can feel free to add things. Don't like delete anything. but I've kind of compiled some resources there. I'll also put my like slides maybe in there, and I'll also email them out. So yeah. Oh, Amber, I see your comment with a trigger warning. So I won't read it out loud. Yeah, definitely in that situation, it just really proves that this work is so important. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, like there were many times in middle school where I was bullied, middle and high school and elementary school, where I was bullied for being gay or perceived to be gay, even though it was correct. And I often, contemplated suicide, unfortunately. So, this work is really important to me personally, but also it's important to students who feel the same way as me. I wish that I had this is going to sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but I wish I had an out gay teacher when I was in school, because it would have just propelled me to feel more comfortable with myself earlier on.
Jamie, can I add something to what you said? You really just hit on what I was just typing on your survey, that I feel like because I am not in the LGBT plus community, that when I try to stop any bullying or create that inclusive language, that it's not as effective. Like if I was in the community, then they would be able to identify more with me. So and that may just be me thinking I just don't know enough. So who am I to say this? But I don't know if that is a thing.
So what I would say is like, you definitely don't have to be part of the community to stand up to bullying or homophobic behavior. And you, like I said, you may not understand all the nuances of everything. You may not feel 100% like ready and like I have like a response ready if a kid says X, and I think that that's okay. I think like being vulnerable in front of students is like one of the most important things that you can do, and I actually regret so much the times I didn't stand up when kids said, oh, that's so gay or whatever, when I wasn't out as a teacher. I was out in everyone else in my life, but I was not out as a teacher. And I think like it is slightly easy for me as an out teacher to be like, hey, this isn't okay for like obvious reasons, because here I am, this gay teacher in front of you. And so like that drives home a point, but I think even like beyond that, I don't use that as ammo. I don't say, well, you're offending me because I'm the gay teacher. I say like, hey, what if there was a student in here who like was unsure if they were like comfortable coming out and they heard what you said? Do you think that they would feel comfortable coming out? I really try to make it about like the kids in the room. I really try really hard to not make it about me, because it's easy to make it about me, but like it's so much more powerful to make it about the students in the room. Hopefully that helps.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
I think that one kind of way to like bridge into that is, rather than, it was one of the suggestions you had, is sort of like, what did you mean by that? Kind of putting it back on the kid, where you're not then accusing, you don't have to interpret it. You're just saying, maybe I didn't understand what you were saying. Could you elaborate? What were you trying to convey? And that can be an easier entry point. If you don't really feel like, you're the expert, and I mean, nobody really is, regardless of where you are on the spectrum. But that could be an easier entry point.
Yeah, great. I think that's an awesome idea. Okay, I got a private message, but I'm gonna read it out loud. Hopefully that's okay. I just won't say where it's from. How does an adult a student when the teacher is asked, are you gay? Because that's what they perceive the adult is. A student thinks they're gay because of your short hairstyle. I've definitely had students who, before I was out, who said, and this is actually, I'm going to share my story. Like I'll put the link to it because I want you to watch it, where I kind of talk about this. I had like a moment in my class, my first year of teaching, where I tried to address behavior, and then a student turned it around on me and was like, well, are you gay? And I was like, and I like froze up, and it like was one of the like worst moments of my life, because I should have just been like, yes, I am. But I didn't. And like, ultimately, like, I regret it. But to the question, I think like it's important to, get rid of like stereotypes as much as possible. Like just because someone has a certain hairstyle or a certain way they dress or whatever doesn't mean that they're queer. It could be, and in fact, like it might be, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are. And I think having that conversation with students is important and meaningful to have. Seeing some of you who came out. Oh, I love it. Yeah, it's really great to feel empowered to be out in the classroom. Autumn, I see you, and I'm going to unmute you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I keep forgetting which setting on my headset is on and off because I just got it.
That's
but
okay.
I definitely want to add to the whole, when kids ask you about being queer or trans, I've had that happen to me when I would volunteer in middle schools and for after school programs, because I'm still working on my PhD, so I'm not teaching science yet. But I've found myself responding more openly with them than with, say, some adults, because for me, it's more important that they have someone to know that this is a thing. I had one student who asked me if I was like a man or a woman, and like asked me if I was like gay, and I was just always outright just be like, yeah, I am. And then if they say like, oh, that's weird, I would always respond like, well, it's just who I am. Like, it might not be you, but that's me, and things like that. And I also have, I actually pulled this out because it was behind my shelf here, but I can share this with the Google Drive. I started already because I'm like so excited about all of this. But I got this in 2016 from one of my professors that actually inspired me to want to be a college STEM teacher someday and to be a queer leader in STEM, especially in engineering, because it's a very white male dominated field. But it's called Strategies for Challenging Oppression.
Ooh.
And it's got, it's like a toolbox of like 10 different ways you can kind of respond to things you might see in your classroom, whether it's with LGBT, issues with race, poverty, things like that. And of course, they always emphasize that like you're not going to be perfect at it. It takes practice, so you might not know how to respond in your classroom. Because I know there are times in my classroom where things have happened, and I was just like, I don't know how to respond to you. But that's also because they were college students and my peers, because it's weird when you're a TA. But I can upload this because it mentions things like you mentioned about like what does that mean, like asking the student about that. And it goes from a range of saying things like, that's not my experience, and then you talk about like kind of your experience with that issue, to just shutting it down and being like, I'm not going to even listen to your kind of more oppressive thoughts and things. So I think that's more ideal for the adult level than it is for the kid level. But just thought I would share. I've had lots of words to say.
No,
I have to read that book, Elizabeth. It's on my list. Sorry, I saw something in the chat. I'm going to mute myself now.
Good. I'm so excited to go back and read the chat because I was not able to look at it while this was happening. And I know there was great conversation happening there. Thank you so much for sharing, Autumn. I believe the Google Drive, I just checked. You might not be able to edit it, but I want it to be like a public thing where you can go in and add things. And I'm going to add, I already got the idea to add a computer science folder and to add like a general resources folder. So I feel like the strategies to combat oppression might go in like the general resources. That's a really great one.
Yeah, and I can always send it to you if you prefer
No,
that.
no, I want this Google Drive. I mean, you can send it to me, definitely, but definitely like feel empowered to add things to this Google Drive and share it far and wide. That's kind of the idea, that like, you know, people will use it and like have it as a resource.
Awesome.
Thank you. Any other questions? I know it's almost 7:30. I don't want to keep you past time unless you absolutely want to, but I will say that I am going to be watching Survivor at 8 p.m. So like that's a hard cutoff. Definitely, like if you are heading out, please fill out that feedback survey. I would love to hear some of your thoughts, what was helpful, what maybe wasn't. I've done this presentation a couple of times and changed things, added things, gotten rid of things. So yeah, you can feel free to stick around and I can answer more questions. You can feel free to unmute yourself as you say goodbye or whatever. It's been so quiet from my end. So I'd love to hear some of your voices.
Thanks so much. I gotta go. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Jamie, thank you so much. I really want to affirm you're doing great work. Thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot. I will say it, so like if you read my little thing about NSTA, last year I gave this presentation. There was more stuff now, but the room packed in with, there were only like, I counted like 62 seats, and there were like at least 100 people that were packed into that room. I don't know if any of you were there, but
Oh,
yay.
Yep, good job.
So hopefully you've noticed that I've changed some things and some of my gotten more precise.
It's grown, and yeah, that precision language is hard. But I'll see you later, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Yeah, hopefully like you all have learned something, and you know, we'll take stuff with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I look forward to like being part of the ongoing group to keep expanding on all this.
Yeah,
So.
thinking of like maybe making like a Facebook group or something, to maybe just like build some of this stuff out and really get people like I want a movement. That's kind of the
Yes.
Because
I feel you.
I just wish that this kind of stuff had been happening when I was in school. Like it would have changed my whole life.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely feel like I would have known about my identity earlier if there were more things out there and available to consume that weren't just hush hush, let's not talk about it kind of things.
Right.
So, but yeah, I'm definitely like the type where when I am teaching someday and I have my own office, there's gonna be a big old pride flag, and like everyone's gonna know like, hey, if you got issues, you can come to me.
Yeah.
I try to be like super open with my students about that stuff. I've had students come to me and be like, you are the most personable professor I've ever had. And I'm like, thanks, I'm not a professor yet, but I love you and I appreciate you. Gotta get that PhD done first, and then you can call me a professor.
What are you getting your PhD in?
I'm studying biomaterials engineering.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I make stuff from trees is how I explain it to people. Stuff that isn't paper, because my undergraduate and my master's was in paper engineering.
Oh,
So
wow. That's awesome.
yeah, and I'm also doing a concurrent master's at in teaching and curriculum. So that way I'm a professor who knows how to teach, because I've had too many STEM professors who are like, let's just lecture forever. I'm like, no.
Not effective at all.
No. But yeah, thank you so much for all of this. I'm super happy that I came.
Thank you so much for coming. How did you hear about it, if I can ask?
The NSTA emails.
Oh, great. I'm so glad I sent it to that one, because I feel like that got me like 50 more people to sign up. And I was
Yeah. The second I saw it, I was already signing up. I'm like, no, we're good. We're signed up. Let's go.
Yeah.
So.
I was like, oh, should I send it to that listserv? I wasn't sure.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And I think I left my contact info in the survey that you sent, the Google Forms. So I look forward to hearing from you and making this a movement.
Yeah, of course. And we're stronger together, right?
Heck yeah. It's just like the straw or the spaghetti. It's easier to break one than to break 40.
Yes, exactly. I love that.
All right. Well, I'll let you get ready for Survivor. You have a good night, all right?
All right, you too. Thank you, Autumn. Nice
Of
to meet
course. Nice to meet you. Bye.
you. Bye. Lee or Elizabeth, do you have any other questions before I end the meeting? Okay. Well, it was so nice to meet you. I'm going to stop recording. Of course, thank you so much for coming.